everyone, Carl Baimage here and welcome back to INC Live. Now, if there's been one big story in the women's bantamweight division this year, it's been the return of Miesha Tate. After her comeback against one of the sport's old guard, how would she fare against the division's new breed when she faced grappling ace Ketlen Vieira? Let's get to the fights. And we start with our main event where Ketlen Vieira derailed Miesha Tate's comeback, winning a unanimous decision with two judges giving her 3 rounds and the other going 49-46. Now I'm going to be going against the grain with a lot of people online here. I didn't hate this fight. I don't think that it should have been the main event. I personally would have gone with Michael Chiesa versus Sean Brady. And in terms of pure technique, look elsewhere. This wasn't a fight to show people if you wanted them to get involved in the pure striking skill set that comes with mixed martial arts. What this fight was to me, possibly because Miesha was involved, I got this image in my head. It reminded me of that sort of old school Strikeforce women's fights, where you had two ladies who made up for their limitations as athletes and just turned it into that sort of dirty, grimy slugfest with a lot of forward pressure. And I was entertained by the fight. Maybe that sort of sums up me as an MMA fan, but I got a lot out of it and I was invested in the matchup. I think Miesha especially deserves a lot of praise in that regard because I think she realised very early on in this fight that she didn't have the skill set in the way that Ketlen Vieira did. Like, Ketlen is a massive bantamweight, and that's something that I'm going to bring up a little bit later on. And she realised, hey, I'm not going to be able to get this girl down. I mean, she tried a couple of times to do so, especially early in the match. And I don't have the striking ability. It's never been one of Miesha Tate's fortes. But by using a lot of forward pressure and turning it into that dirty, sloppy fight, you had a lot of people coming out of it who believed that Miesha Tate won that fight. Personally, I didn't think so. I think the judges made the right call. I went 3-2 to Ketlen Vieira, and her face looked like an absolute mess by the end of it as well. So Ketlen was hitting with a ton of ferocity. And Miesha was still able to go through it, and as I mentioned before, made that argument that she potentially won. There was always going to be a lot of questions over where Miesha Tate stood in this weight class, because yes, she got the win over Marion Renault, but that was a 44-year-old who'd been on a losing streak and mentally had one foot out the door. She retired straight after. The question was always going to be, what was Miesha Tate going to be able to do when she faced the bantamweight new guard, when she faced people like the Ketlen Vieiras and the Yana Kunitskayas. And my personal take is, Miesha still serves a purpose in this weight class. Maybe not as the title challenger that the UFC and she herself hoped that she would be, but I can still see her serving as that sort of top 7, top 8 sort of fighters. What the UFC should do with her, in my opinion, is use her in the same way that Bellator use their veteran fighters. Like, give her a Holly Holm rematch, put her against Sarah McMahon, or maybe a rematch with Raquel Pennington further down the road. That sort of level of matches. She still has a lot of name value. She still brings it every time she fights in the octagon. And maybe she doesn't have the abilities to ever challenge for a belt again, but I still believe that she adds some value. Anything, to be honest, at women's bantamweight in 2021 should be taken on board, because this is a weak weight class. It needs all the help it can get. And I think Miesha Tate providing that little bit of star power is something that can do that, even though she lost this fight. In terms of Ketlen's a strange one for me, because if you look at Ketlen Vieira on paper, she has a lot of tools to potentially be fighting for the belt. She is massive for this weight class. In my opinion, she could very easily be comfortable fighting at 145. She gets herself down to 135. She dwarfed Miesha in terms of her frame. She didn't show it in this fight, but she has some fantastic jiu-jitsu skills. And if she can refine her striking, and she's more than capable of doing that, bearing in mind how young she is, bearing in mind she's training at Nova União, she could be fighting for that belt in 1 or 2 years' time. Yet despite all that, I come out of a Ketlen Vieira fight always feeling that there's something missing. For whatever reason, she just seems a bit too comfortable sitting on the back foot and allowing people to come to her. I think maybe part of that could have been down to what happened against Irene Aldana. She was very aggressive, ended up getting knocked out. Part of it could have been a little bit overawed by the star power of Miesha, because this was a big, high-profile situation for her, taking on former bantamweight champion, legend of the sport. I just think that if Ketlen managed to sit down on her punches and try and take the fight to Miesha, and because as we saw when you look at Miesha's face, she was bloody to a pulp in this fight, so Ketlen's striking was working. Yet she didn't want to push herself forward and go for the finish. And it was the same thing when we saw against Yana Kunitskaya. She had a lot of top control, but she wasn't doing anything with it. And eventually it led to Kunitskaya winning that fight just because she was trying to finish the match more actively. The biggest issue I have with Ketlen Vieira coming out of this fight is she's picked up the biggest win of her career. She's potentially going to be moving into the top 5 and could be challenging for a belt. And yet we have had nobody online talking about it. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that this weekend's fight night wasn't really all that great, which I'll get into in a little bit more detail. But I think the biggest issue is the UFC's marketing. Like, the UFC made the right call building this fight night around Miesha Tate. Between her and Ketlen Vieira, it's no question who's the biggest star. Miesha's more popular, she's got a better story, she's a more marketable girl, which I don't like bringing it up with women's MMA, but it is still a factor for the female fighters. But the problem was the UFC put all their eggs into the Miesha Tate basket and never left themselves open to the possibility of Ketlen winning this fight. I mean, Ketlen was the bookmaker's favourite. I personally picked her to win this fight, so there was a chance of Ketlen getting the W. But the UFC was so committed to the idea of Miesha winning that they haven't left themselves any opening to work with Ketlen Vieira as a brand going forward. And we've seen them do this plenty of times before where they put all their eggs into one basket. They don't leave themselves open to the possibility of things not going their way. Like we saw that recently earlier this year where you looked at Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler. Chandler got a huge bulk of the promotion and the UFC seemed unready for the idea of Charles Oliveira actually winning the belt. Yeah, you can maybe argue that Ketlen's going to benefit from the rub of beating a legend like Miesha Tate. But it's like that old saying in Breaking Bad, just because you shoot Jesse James doesn't make you Jesse James. And we've seen a lot of fighters who picked up big, high-profile wins on huge pedestals and got nothing in terms of rub afterwards. Even Khabib, to an extent, wasn't a huge mega draw, and he was involved in the biggest fight in MMA history. So the UFC need to do something about this, because if they don't, they're going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. I feel sorry for Ketlen that her big high profile win isn't being recognised, and it's no fault of her own. Now, this roundup of the rest of the card is going to be a little bit shorter than normal because, let's be honest, there wasn't really all that much to talk about. Of the 11 fights on this card, only one had a finish, which we'll get to a little bit later on. And even in those judges' decisions, there weren't really all that many exciting, high-profile, memorable moments. One of the big exceptions is the one I'm going to be starting off with, which is Adrian Yanez taking on Davy Grant. Both of these guys known for their knockouts, for their striking ability, both known for getting performance bonuses and getting themselves another 50 grand this time around. Yanez, in my opinion, deserved to win this fight. I scored it 29-28 in his favour. In a lot of ways, it was quite similar to Ketlen Vieira versus Miesha Tate, whereby you had the more clinical, effective striker staying on the back foot and landing those big shots, but his opponent having the big moment and pushing forward. And in the eyes of some people, including one of the judges, which I don't agree with whatsoever, I do think that Yanez deserved to win this one. I think when you look at pure boxing, I think there maybe are some limitations when it comes to the rest of his skill set. I think he maybe did get tagged a bit too many times for my liking, but he does have fantastic boxing. And once again, we say this all the time, the bantamweight division and its ability to produce these exciting, high-profile prospects. This division could very well be the bee's knees, not just now, which a lot of people believe it is, one of the best divisions in the UFC, but even going forward, the next 3 or 4 years with people like Yanez coming through, this division could be top dog for goodness knows how long. The other big story was Tyler Santos, a first round submission over the former Juan Caldwood, now Juan Wood. That's really hard to get my tongue around, I have to be honest. A lot of people thought this one could be one-sided. That unfortunately was the way that it turned out to be. Very similar to Ketlen Vieira though, one of the big things that I've been noticing is Taila Santos isn't getting any kind of coverage. Like, she's going to be entering the top 5 with this win. She is, 18-1, 19-1 over her MMA career. When you look on paper, you've got her down. She is going to be fighting Valentina Shevchenko next. And nobody seems to be having that kind of conversation. And I don't know if that's because the UFC are planning something with Shevchenko at bantamweight. I don't know about that. Or maybe it's because of the fact that people still look at her and see that one next to her name, see that split decision loss on a UFC debut to Marva Barella, and use that to discredit her. Like, if she gets the split decision in that fight, she's 19-0 or 20-0. And people are saying, you have got to put Shevchenko against this opponent. This is finally somebody who could be challenging her over the next couple of years. And the UFC aren't having that conversation, which I find very, very strange. She's cleared out the Lauren Murphys, the Caitlin Chukagians of the world. It's time for her to face a new breed. What Taila Santos could be in that fight is that sort of Dominic Reyes-style wildcard, where you look at the long winning streak, you see the knockouts, and you think, hey, you know what? Maybe this person does have the potential to cause an upset, that element of the unknown. And we've seen plenty of fighters do that in the past. Another thing I will say as well, flyweight gets a really bad rap for being one of the weakest divisions in the UFC. And I'm never going to put it at the same level as, say, men's bantamweight or men's lightweight. But you look at Taila Santos, and you look at some of the girls coming up just entering the top 15. People like Casey O'Neill, Maria Agapova, Erin Blanchfield, Miranda Maverick. This division has a lot of potential to, in my opinion, be at the same level as strawweight. Strawweight always gets a lot of praise for being the sort of marquee women's division in the UFC. I think flyweight could very well fit that same moniker. I do think the UFC need to seriously consider the amount of fight cards that they're putting on. Now, I'm a big MMA fan, and I'll watch pretty much anything, whether that's the UFC, Bellator, PFL, you name it. I'll try and get around to watching it at some time. But in my opinion, the UFC are really diluting their product by putting on too many fight nights. Now, I know they have to deal with ESPN, and there is a contractual obligation to maybe put on some of these weaker fight nights. But if you were trying to get a new fan into the sport, and you had TV cards similar to Ketlen Vieira versus Miesha Tate, and it was the same thing with the Aspen Ladd and Norma Dumont card a couple of weeks ago, Uriah Hall versus Sean Strickland earlier this year, some of the weaker, lower profile fight nights. That kind of quality is just going to make your product look worse, in my opinion. So if it was me, and I know I'm not a businessman, I'm speaking purely from a sports perspective here. Personally, I would limit the amount of fight nights that we're doing and do what we're doing with the pay-per-views over these past couple of months. Stack them. Make those shows feel like big, epic events. Get out of the apex. Try and go back on the road and make these fight nights feel special. You look at some of those Fox fight nights that they used to do around sort of 2012, 2013. Those were fantastic pay-per-view worthy cards, and we're not seeing the UFC doing them anymore. What we're seeing is what we had on Saturday, where you've got a lot of Contender Series alum having these forgettable unanimous decisions. I just want the best UFC product we possibly can get. In my opinion, Saturday wasn't that. Like I said before, one of the shorter fight night cards that I've done so far, simply because there wasn't all that much to talk about. I could very easily be ranting about the state of the UFC, so if you want to hear me do that, you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/IamCagefighting. Once again, I want to say thank you to anyone who's tuned in. Please like, share, subscribe, ring the bell so you never miss any of our content. Thankfully for us, for Thanksgiving, we're going to be taking a 2-week break from these fight night recaps, but we're going to be back with our hopes for another fantastic fight night. And if the main event's anything to go by, we should very well be getting that. Rob Font is taking on Jose Aldo. Once again, another classic top 5 clash in the bantamweight division is on the cards. This is the INC. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe.